Richard Saslaw was first elected to the Virginia House of Delegates in 1976. In 1980, he was elected to the Virginia State Senate. Senator Saslaw serves as the Senate Democratic leader. He sits on the Senate Commerce and Labor Committees and the Subcommittee on Transportation for the Senate Finance Committee. Since 2008, he's been a budget conferee and has played a key role in shaping Virginia fiscal policy. Senator Saslaw has done much for Virginia public education, Virginia business, and mass transit in Northern Virginia. Senator, I met you a number of years ago when you were running for Congress.
Right.
The rest is history. What made you want to enter politics in the first place, do you think?
Well, I thought this was something that I would enjoy. I thought it was something that I could do and do well. After, when I lost that Democratic primary, of course, I was brand new, nobody ever heard of me. Everybody encouraged me to run for the House of Delegates the next year, and I did and got elected. And I've been in the General Assembly since January of '76. And I enjoy it, and when I don't enjoy it, I'll get out, and as long as the voters will have me. Obviously, if they don't enjoy me, I'm done. I've been able to effect a lot of legislation one way or another. Some of the bad stuff I've gotten killed, some of the good stuff I've helped get passed. Occasionally I've been on the wrong side of the vote, but I think by and large, that I've been helpful to the economic growth of the Commonwealth.
You've been obviously in public service most of your adult life. That had to have impacted both you and your family in some way. How does that change a person? How does it change a family?
Our daughter was born in September of '76, 9 months after I took office. So she's never known me as in any other capacity as far as public life is concerned. Of course, in Virginia, legislature's part-time. So you have to have a business career as well, which I've had. It's taken time away from the family that I regret, but we did things as a family unit.
She's turned out quite well, though.
She turned out very well. She's very, very, very bright. Got that from the mom, and I'm not kidding. Went to the Science High School, went to UVA, went in the Peace Corps, and then Stanford Law School, and she has her own law firm out in California. And she just got married, and she's been very successful, and she's married to a super guy.
Since you have been a freshman delegate, a lot has transpired in the state. How's Northern Virginia changed?
Well, when I got elected, Fairfax County had about 500,000 people, okay? Today they have 1.1 million or more. The western part of Fairfax County, with the exception of a couple of subdivisions, was all woods. Now it's heavily developed into condos, shopping centers. It's almost a city unto itself. The Loudoun County probably didn't have 50, 60,000 people. Prince William might have had just a few more than that, and they're now both at or close to 400,000 people. So, and Northern Virginia, as a result of having a lot more legislators, has developed a lot more influence in the General Assembly.
Is there one thing that you would have liked to have seen happen since, say, '76 that has not transpired thus far, that you're probably still working on and other Democrats in the state are working on?
I would have liked to have seen a more robust transportation package, but we did the best that we could. We're going to have problems up here until we can get people out of the car. And keep in mind, this is coming from somebody who's earned a living for the last 30-some years owning gasoline stations. So, but you can't road build your way out. You got to develop a transportation system that will move people to the rail, from bus to rail. And in other words, you run the buses in the neighborhood, you pick them up, you take them to the rail. There's never been a major metropolitan area in America that's road built their way out of a traffic jam. And it's not because they haven't tried. Atlanta tried, Houston tried, LA tried, San Francisco tried, although they realized the folly of that back in the 60s. New York, I don't think ever did try it. But I would like to see, a more expansive, transportation system, public transportation system. We also are vastly underfunding K through 12 and higher ed, as well as the social services. And I don't see our way out of that unless you had an increase in the income tax, and there's no appetite for that, particularly at this time. We're asking the schools to make do with what they had in the middle of the last decade, even though they got a lot more students. We're asking the colleges to make do with what they did 10 years ago. In the case of VCU, they have the same budget they had 10 years ago, but with, instead of 20,000 students, they got 28,000. And it's not working. And so we've got that problem. Then there's a lot of other things, but there's one of the things that people keep looking for is the magic bullet in public schools, and there is no magic bullet. I mean, it's hard work. It's a lot of things go into creating a favorable environment. One is a stable home life, which in a lot of areas, of our society does not exist. That spills over and becomes a school problem. There's a whole lot of things. Newport News has a very interesting program called Achievable Dream, which was started by a prominent businessman down there that's been highly successful. And that's a model that's probably worth copying, but it's going to take some doing and some expense.
Metro rail expansion has been in flux for a number of years, but this Tyson's leg seems to be rejuvenating the system, doesn't it?
Well, it's going to create a lot of jobs out from Tyson's. You already have that, but it will create even a lot more there. And Fairfax County has, laid out a new vision for Tyson's that's going to probably add, 100,000 workers and residents out there over the next 20, 25 years. And but extending it to Reston, will be more jobs there, and in the Loudoun, probably will create a couple 100,000 high-tech jobs there. I mean, if you look and see what the Metro did for Boston and Clarendon, I mean, you got a pretty good model as to what's likely to happen.
Why is this Silver Line such a Democratic-Republican thing?
Well, it's not a Democratic-Republican thing. You had opposition from Cuccinelli. You had opposition from the board, some of the board in Loudoun. They ultimately voted to be part of the extension out there, which was a very wise move on their part. So it's, I mean, I've come across some Democrats that, were opposed to that, but more of the opposition came from the Republican Party, but not all of the Republican Party.
Virginia's governor and attorney general have been in the news a lot lately about some of their financial dealings. Does that affect Virginia's ability to do business outside of the state? Does it affect its bond rating? When these kind of headlines hit, what happens?
No, I don't think it affects that. It affects those two, but the state's got a pretty strong reputation to overcome, the publicity of that. Where there was a potential to do harm was Cuccinelli's, never-ending bashing of the gay community. There will come a time when our prohibitions that we have on the books regarding civil unions and marriage are going to handicap us recruiting companies that are not going to want to come here because there'll be people in their hierarchy saying, I can't go to Virginia. That has the potential to do a lot more damage to our credibility as a state and a magnet for business than the personal problems of the governor and the personal problems of the attorney general.
Let's talk about your district. Boy, you've seen a lot of changes, haven't you, over the course
Well,
of
I used to live in the east end of my district, and now I live in the west end of my district.
So you've seen both sides of it.
Well, I used to go all the way to Loudoun and Prince William, Now I don't go anywhere near there. And that changed in 2001 dramatically, and it changed again in 2011 and made it even, it's a heavily Democratic district. I lived in a Republican district for the first 6 elections.
What do you see in the next term? What's the biggest challenge for you? When you run for office in a year or so, what are you going to be dealing with?
To try to build a solid majority. I mean, if you take a look at what's happened as a result of the Republicans being in control of the Senate, because it was 2020 and they had the lieutenant governor, I think a lot of damage has been done. We had a lot of negative publicity over these anti-abortion bills, the ultrasound bill, voter suppression, and that's all they are. It had nothing to do with dishonest elections. And in fact, there was a story in the Washington Post yesterday. Richard Posner, who's considered to be one of the most brilliant men in the entire federal judiciary, says he regrets upholding the Indiana law because he now sees it as nothing but voter suppression to keep minorities from voting. He pointed out, which I already knew, these laws have only been passed in states controlled by the Republicans, and it was done strictly to keep the blacks from voting.
Well, right now in Virginia, photo ID is required.
Well, it starts next year.
Okay. But that's not necessarily a Republican issue, is it?
That was a Republican issue.
So essentially what's happening with this Republican issue, you're taking the voter card, which does not require a photo ID, and you're requiring someone to go get a separate ID with a photo on it if they don't have a driver's license.
Yeah.
So that does add an extra layer to the whole voting process.
It's strictly done to keep the blacks from voting.
Isn't that interesting? The gubernatorial campaign is not a pretty one. You've got Attorney General.
You think?
Attorney General Cuccinelli having to deal with Star Scientific. But then you have the Republicans throwing a hardball at Terry McAuliffe about his green tech connections. What's legitimate here?
Well, green tech probably hasn't progressed as fast as Terry or anybody else involved with it would have liked. But that's not a moral or ethical issue. That's just, the business plan hasn't moved. It's moving, but it's moving very slowly. They wound up going to Mississippi because Virginia didn't want to get involved and help them because they didn't want to help anything McAuliffe was connected with. So Haley Barbour, Republican governor, did. And ultimately, I mean, I'm assuming that, a decade from now, when that thing's running full blast, we'll probably wish it was here. The FBI isn't investigating,
That's true.
McAuliffe.
Right.
That's the long and the short of it, okay? Grand juries aren't looking into dealings with McAuliffe. They're looking into dealings that the governor and Cuccinelli had.
Both candidates running for governor want to overhaul the standards of learning. Are we really behind the curve in terms of education?
Not really. Not all that much.
Mm-hmm.
By and large, we're producing a pretty decent product that Education Weekly rates us as having the 4th best public education system in the country.
Well, that's good news. Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Health Care Act, that's another sticking point between the Democrats and Republicans.
That's correct.
The Democrats see it as a job booster. The Republicans don't. Is that accurate?
Well, it would definitely boost jobs, but the broader problem is that if we don't do it, there are 3 things for sure that will happen. Those 400,000 people are still going to get medical care, but they're going to get it at the emergency room of a hospital. Some of that will go to our Medicaid and jack that cost up considerably. What doesn't go to that will show up in the health insurance increases to the business community in their plans starting in January 2015, and it will be a whopper of an increase because that $2.3 billion that the government's offering us that's a real cost. And those people are going to keep getting that medical care, okay? They're getting the most expensive possible when they show up at that emergency room, and we're going to pay for it. We're going to pay for it through Medicaid, and what we don't pay for it through the Medicaid gets dumped on the business community, and the business community has to pick up probably about, of that $2.3 billion, they're going to pick up about 1.7, 1.8 billion a year of that increase. I mean, it's absolute lunacy for us not to expand.
How much of that money is actually recoverable from those emergency room visits? Has that ever been factored in at all?
When you say recoverable.
Well, for example, you are going to be billed for visiting an emergency room, whether you pay the bill or not.
Oh, you're not. Well, when those people go in there, they ask them that none of it's recoverable.
Okay.
They go in there, and most of them don't have a job,
I see.
or they're making $9,000 a year, or $10,000 a year, which doesn't qualify them for the guidelines for Medicaid expansion. That's the working poor is what that's going to cover. These people are working, okay, and you're not going to get blood out of a turnip.
So that does make sense.
Yeah.
To deal with it, to deal with the issue
Yeah.
now. Yeah. All right, you've done an awful lot in your tenure in public office. Many accomplishments. I'm just going to ask you to tout a few. Some of the things that you want to be remembered for when they look back at your legacy.
Well, the speed limit got raised to 65 miles an hour from 55.
And there were a lot of happy people.
Yeah. I mean, nobody was driving 55 anyway.
Yeah.
Covered the trucks.
Okay.
Prevented measured rate service from taking place in the late 70s, where the phone company, if you called your next door neighbor, would have charged you as if it was a long distance phone call. We had a woman who went in for a lumpectomy. They discovered it was apparently cancerous without ever waking her up, did a double mastectomy based on the approval of her husband. We stopped that. Now they don't do that. Ultimately that part of the code got repealed because of the way it's set up now. They couldn't do that anyway. This a lot of crime bills, the willful, deliberate, and premeditated murder or commission of a robbery, or subsequent thereto, or commission of a rape or subsequent thereto, I put on the books. Mandatory sentencing for use of a gun. The first one was my bill back in the early 80s. There's been a lot of stuff.
You had quite a legacy. All right, you've got an election coming up within about 18 months to 2 years. Will you be contested?
I'm sure I will.
Have you ever run uncontested?
Once in 1987.
So you want the Senate back?
Yes.
And is that
I
vital?
mean, I mean, what's happened there has been pretty much disgraced the state.
And you think that you can make considerable headway with a Democratic majority in the Senate?
You can make headway, but you can, just as important, you can prevent an awful lot of bad stuff from happening.
How important is it that we have a Democratic governor in Virginia coming up?
Very important, because a lot of this stuff that brought a lot of disgrace to the Commonwealth got signed by McDonnell. I mean, had I had 21 people, or had we had a Democratic governor, you would never heard of the word ultrasound or voter suppression.
Well, it's been a pleasure knowing you all these years, Senator Saslaw.
Thank you, Mike, and likewise.
Thank you for the interview.
Okay.
Thank you. In 2011, the nonpartisan organization Virginia Free ranked Senator Saslaw as Virginia's most effective senator.